keep the situation calm without frightening the human. A frightened human telling about skeletons threatening and trying to eat them would bring a lot of unwanted attention to the area, if they could get away to tell. It really was the best situation. "Then I'll feed my new friend, Papyrus," she declared. "If Sans doesn't want any of the food, that's his own fault." Papyrus looked at her, torn. "Come on, Papyrus. Let's go get the food. It's in my camper," she told him, starting to tug him towards the door. Papyrus stared back at Sans as he followed the human out. Once they were outside in the now near blackness, the human felt around her pockets and pulled out a flashlight, guiding Papyrus back to her camper. Sans scrambled after them, keeping his eyes on her. He could hear his brother introducing himself properly, and them talking, starting to sound like old friends. It made him sick. He wasn't going to let her trick his brother. She wasn't going to hurt him. He wouldn't let her. She dug around in a cooler, pulling things out and handed them to Papyrus until his arms were full. Then she carried a small bag with her as they made their way back, Sans again taking the rear. A flash of lightning lit the sky momentarily, and he saw Papyrus jump. Papyrus didn't like storms. The storms sounded like the bad things from when they were underground. They made it back to the cabin, the rain starting to drizzle down as they walked inside. Sans sat at the table, hyper-alert and watching the human, refusing to fail his brother, but not really paying attention to their conversation or details as the two cooked. He snapped back to reality suddenly as a large pot was set in front of him on the table. He glared at the human as she brought over another pot, setting it next to Papyrus in the middle of the table. There was a bit of a scuffle as Papyrus tried to serve her first, and she tried to serve him first, ending in laughing and them serving each other at the same time from different pots. Sans glared at her as she tried to serve him next, and pointedly refused, still staring at her, when Paps tried, making a worried look grow on his brother's face. He didn't want to get caught in her snare. He'd save his brother when it came down to it, taking on his debt, and he wouldn't be able to do that if he was also in debt. Conversation flowed mostly easily as the meal went by, Sans still watching and only participating when Papyrus spoke to him. Sans watched her and noticed how much more food she had put on Papyrus's plate. A ploy to indebt him further, certainly. And how, whenever Papyrus was looking at her, she was just about to take a bite. Or had just taken one, though she didn't eat it in stretches between, busying her mouth with talking instead. When Papyrus finished his plate, she immediately grabbed a pot and started filling it again, and Sans wondered if she caught the longing look in his brother's eyes. He was a large skeleton, and it took a lot to keep him going. Though it seemed like there had been quite a bit of things she brought, there didn't seem to be an excessive amount of food. After Pap's second half helping, the pots were empty, denoting that there had been just enough for the three of them. Sans was used to waiting for Papyrus to finish eating anyway, always making sure his brother was taken care of first, so it wasn't that tough for him, even if he was hungry. He could tell that Papyrus was worried, though. The humans still have food on her plate, and she tried to give it to Sans, but he straight up growled at her, sounding like an animal about to rip her throat out. She took her plate away from his, her eyes studying the table for a moment before looking back up to him with a small smile. "The payment will be that you eat my cooking," she offered.
"Pass,"
he growled. She looked away again, then up to Papyrus. "Do you have any plastic wrap?"
"Yes, it's over here. Let me show you."
His brother stood and showed her where they kept it, and Sans watching her adjust his plate so that every little scrap fit on the plate and wrapped it before putting it in the fridge. Sans glared at the fridge. She couldn't trick him that easily. Sans' eyelights trailed after her every move as she helped Papyrus clean up their cooking mess and dishes. Finally, the last dish put away in the cupboard, the human turned to Papyrus and smiled again. "Suppose I should head back for bed? Do you mind if I use your bathroom first?"
"Of course, human listener."
Papyrus showed her where the room was, Sans following them to the living room.
"Brother, why are you being so rude?"
Sans let his eye sockets flare up at his brother's face before going back to the bathroom door.
Just being careful, Pap. You never know how dangerous humans are.
The two skeletons walked Listener to the door. Well, Papyrus walked her. Sans just sort of loomed behind them. Papyrus opened the door and flinched as the bolt of lightning lit the sky, followed closely by the boom of thunder. "Look like the storm's in full swing," he commented, trying to stay upbeat, though he was obviously nervous. Yeah, Listener muttered nervously. It was a good 15-20 minute walk back to her camper. She would be drenched the second she stepped out into the downpour, falling at the moment, and she had no heat to warm her back up.
Are you sure you should go? Will it be safe to go through all that rain?
Papyrus worried. A smile lifted Listener's lips as she tried to sound confident. "Oh, sure. It's just water after all." She faded out doubtfully.
I think I'd feel better knowing you got there safely," Papyrus insisted.
A low chuckle started behind them, near a mechanical laugh.
So then,
Sans drooled darkly, his voice seeming to get creepier with every word.
how about a sleepover?
The only thing that could have made it more horror movie cliché would be if a bolt of lightning had lit the sky right then. And then one did, followed closely by a boom of thunder that made Papyrus jump.